Hello, today is Thursday, March 17th, 2022. I'm Joe Schmidt from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. As you probably know, we negotiate a lot of network service contracts at TC2 and LB3, and there's a key MSA term that has become a focus for almost all of our clients, and that is payment terms. Long ago, telecommunications invoices were due within 30 days of invoice date. Just plain and simple. That's the way it's done. That's what we were told. But today, most companies are negotiating for payment terms ranging from 60 to 90 days. Believe it or not, this is often one of the items that can make or break a deal. Let's look into what this means to your bottom line. To do that, I'm joined by my fellow TC2 directors, Theresa Knutson and Julie Gardner. Hey, Theresa, Julie, welcome back to Staying Connected.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be back.
Yep. Thanks for having us, Joe.
Okay, Theresa, why don't you give us a quick overview of what you're seeing out there with payment terms?
Sure. Payment terms are an interesting topic for sure in the telecommunications industry. Companies put a huge focus on it during RFP and extension negotiation. And the trend is to require payment terms, as you mentioned, Joe, that go beyond the typical 30-day interval. Large enterprises are being mandated by their internal treasury departments to target 60 to 90-day payment terms. And once agreed to by the parties, these payment terms are contractually memorialized in the MSAs between the supplier and their customers. And in no case should a supplier assess late payment fees during the negotiated payment period.
I suspect that the reason that we're here today is to discuss this because the suppliers do indeed charge late payment interest in error. So, Julie, can you tell us more about the problem and the cause?
Absolutely. So the problem's actually pretty rudimentary. Supplier billing systems really are not set up to accommodate custom payment terms and those late payment fee waivers that you may have. They're really set up to track payments within that 30-day interval from the date of the invoice. The billing systems will assess those late payment penalties and interest at day 31. Now, historically, all companies used to just accept that 30-day payment period and the late payment interest that accompanied it because telecom was really considered a utility. Therefore, custom payment terms and waivers were not historically a focus. Enterprises over the last several years have started asking for extended payment terms like 45 days. Now we're finding that many companies are asking for even longer periods of time to pay, as mentioned, up to 60 to even 90 days. And investment in carrier billing systems really has not been a priority for most of the carriers out there. So fixing these late payment interest calculations and payment billing systems to accommodate the custom terms is not something that they've addressed thus far.
Oh, yeah, you're right. This has become such a critical focus. I think, frankly, a lot of large enterprises, they often have these mandates like all supplier payment terms must be 60 days or all supplier payment terms must be 90 days. And, right, what we find is that any exception to those mandates requires some CFO or CPO to approve them.
Yeah, and even complicating things more is often there's a negotiation around when that payment term period begins. It can be either from the date of the invoice, which is a very firm date, or from the date of the receipt of the invoice by the customer, which is really kind of an unknown date. So there are often disputes and discussions around when something is indeed late or not.
So, Julie, just in general practice, what happens for enterprises with custom payment terms and late payment fee waivers?
Well, it can be a huge mess for sure. First of all, late payment fees will be assessed on invoices, regardless of whether or not you may have those late payment fee waivers or those custom terms. It happens every day due to the limitations we just discussed with the supplier billing systems. So now comes the hard part. Where do you, as the customer, find whether or not you're being assessed these charges on your invoice? We were just working with a client this week who had late payment penalties assessed on their invoice, and it was on page 18 of a 1,300-page invoice. Another client had late payment penalties assessed on an invoice, but it was labeled as an adjustment. And so when you dig into the details, you see adjustment, but unless you really dig, you're not going to realize that that adjustment is in fact late payment interest.
Yeah, and this situation that Julie's describing becomes even more interesting because we reached out to the supplier and said, hey, you shouldn't be charging late payment fees on this because they are within the negotiated payment terms. And they said, oops, you're right, we'll credit you next month. But this then puts the onus back on you to check next month to make sure that it gets credited and also to make sure that they don't assess another late payment fee next month. So it's compounding in the effort that it takes to manage and resolve these issues.
I can imagine the size of some of those penalties, right? Because some invoices can be so large and they have penalties of what, 1.5% to 2%?
Yeah, that's right. So think about this. If you're one of our large enterprise users, you may have an account that bills, say, $500,000 a month in charges. And if you have payment terms of 90 days, it wouldn't be uncommon for you to have a total outstanding charge of, say, 1.5 million or 3 months. Late payment fees at 1.5% on your 1.5 million would be almost $23,000 in a single month. And you would have that charge every month unless you're flagging it and asking the supplier to correct it when you have these custom terms or these late payment fee waivers.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, if your contract has these custom payment terms and late payment fee waivers, and these charges are assessed in error, you oftentimes have to open up a billing ticket, dispute the charges, and seek a refund. Some suppliers will automatically credit them the following month, but you need to raise that. But again, you have to track the disputes, monitor these on each and every one of your invoices, and I guarantee you that it will happen month after month.
So the three of us have done a number of podcasts on telecom expense management. And as you've said, most big companies, they do use an external TEM provider. So do the TEMs pick up these charges and report them to their customers? And do they raise disputes on the customer's behalf?
I'll give you a really clear answer. It's yes, maybe, and no. So yes, or maybe. I mean, the TEMs can report on them. And yes, maybe they'll raise the disputes on behalf of their customers, but they don't always find them on the invoices. And as we've mentioned, often these types of charges are buried in the invoice details and they're not clearly labeled. So I find it's helpful to request late payment fee waivers from your suppliers and use that as a tool to make sure that these charges are being credited back to you on a regular basis. And you can also run these types of reports yourself from within your carrier billing portals, and they'll provide you with this level of information. But it's important to note that each carrier is going to report these differently, and sometimes they're going to report them differently based on the underlying biller involved that's generating the late payment charges.
Wow, what a mess. All right, do you guys have any closing thoughts?
Well, I have one. Make sure anytime you finish a contract that has custom payment terms that you relay that information to your accounts payable department and have them update the vendor profile records so that the payments actually get made according to those heavily negotiated and required payment terms. And make sure to check the status a couple months after the contract is done to make sure that everything is being adhered to and you are indeed paying at the negotiated interval. I mean, for example, I had a client who spent a lot of time negotiating for 90-day payment terms. When the contract was done, they put it in their drawer. No one ever told AP. And when we went back, we found out that AP was paying those invoices at 30 days because it was a utility and no one ever told them that the payment terms were anything different. So we had to work with them and make sure that those vendor records got updated. And I guarantee you, amazingly, the suppliers will never say, hey, you've paid us too early. So make sure you share that information with your accounts payable team as soon as you sign any deal with custom payment terms.
And my final thought, really, you need to track your open AR balances and aging with all of your critical suppliers. So any supplier that represents their material amount of spend, you need to be meeting with and requesting an aging and AR report of all accounts that roll up underneath your spend umbrella. That would include interexchange as well as local or ILEC accounts. And this really provides you with a good dashboard into how your payments are tracking. You need to look for large aging balances that go beyond your payment term timing. You need to also look at balances that appear to be one-offs or oddballs. Look for unused credits that are sitting on accounts, which, speaking of unused credits, I think we may have just identified a topic for our next podcast, which is how to find hidden treasures in your supplier billings. But sadly, the suppliers are never going to give you interest on any open, unused credit balances that will be sitting out on your accounts until you provide them with direction on how to apply those.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you, Julie, and thank you as well, Theresa. Well, as you just heard, late payment fees are an issue in your ICT billing. So if you'd like some help figuring it out, you can talk to Theresa, Julie, me, or any of our LB3 and TC2 colleagues by dropping us an email or picking up the phone and giving us a call. You can also stay up to date by subscribing to these Staying Connected podcasts, by checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.